Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at MedComms and the associated website. So information, resources, activities for people who work across the world in and around medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and the associated businesses and so on. You'll find there's lots of resources there, and specifically at NetworkPharma TV, you'll find hundreds of videos, many of which have been recorded from webinars like this. Quick shout out to those of you wanting to get into the business. You'll find lots of resource over at firstmedcommsjob.com and so on and so forth. So go and have a look around if you've not had a look before. I'm delighted today. One of the things I love about these webinars is getting to people together from all over the world. We've got panelists from across the time zones. We've got an audience from across the time zones. We're talking today basically about career opportunities and the challenges, I guess, and opportunities of moving from agency side into pharma. And we've got 4 panelists, all who've made that move. And we're going to start by introducing ourselves, but start with Sian. And Sian, tell us who you are, and let's acknowledge the fact you've got a book, a free ebook, The Agency Advantage, which is sort of gave us the excuse for this this webinar. So you tell us about yourself and about the book, and then we'll ask the others to introduce themselves as well. Over to you, Sian.
Sure, thanks so much. First of all, thanks very much for organising this, Peter. Really appreciate it. So my name's Sian Kneller, and I'm a medical director at GSK. I've been in industry for about 8 years, but I wasn't always in-house in industry. I actually started out in agency. So when I first joined industry, though, I noticed that there weren't that many people who were kind of had a similar profile to me, and I'm really intrigued to see what the others think about the companies that they're working in. But it was definitely the case sort of 8 to 10 years ago that there weren't that many people who kind of had that agency background. I think most of the people in pharma rather were kind of coming through sort of like internships or coming directly from research into pharma. So I was quite an outlier. There were a handful of us, but there weren't that many. So, but it seemed really strange to me because I actually thought that a lot of the skills that I brought to my role at the time in scientific communications was so valuable. I was able to create content, whereas some of my industry colleagues weren't able to. I was able to kind of create MSL trainings and things like that. So yeah, it was really interesting to see that it wasn't quite a common move over, and it kind of got the cogs in my mind thinking. And at the same time, I was getting a lot of DMs on LinkedIn, oh, I saw that you moved from agency into pharma. Congratulations, how can I make that move? Like, give me the magic formula. So all of these things got me thinking there isn't actually, and I was, investigating on Google to see if there was anything out there, but there really wasn't anything out there that kind of gave that roadmap, that career roadmap around, you can go for a MedComms agency and then you can do this, you can stay in a MedComms agency, or you can go over into client side. There was nothing really out there. So yeah, I ended up speaking to multiple people, interviewing people who from across the functions within pharma who come through the MedComms route. And I kind of distilled all of this into the free ebook, The Agency Advantage, which kind of, I think really kind of demystifies a lot of things that if you're outside of, client side in-house, some of the terminology that's used, matrix environment, and how things actually work is really tricky if you're not on the inside. So I think the objective of the book was really to give people that confidence and knowledge and empower them, to be able to kind of make that step themselves. And there's lots of kind of useful hints and tips in there. So that was my experience. I don't know if you want to hand over.
That's great. No, that's fantastic, and we'll talk more about that as we go on. Just sorry if I missed it, but let's just get a couple of things clear so that the audience knows who we're talking to. Sian, you're based in Switzerland, yeah?
I'm based in
At
Switzerland.
GSK,
Yeah,
you
but I'm
said, yeah, that's
British,
Switzerland.
as you can tell, yeah. But
Exactly. So you made the move over from here.
Yeah, I actually was working in an agency in Switzerland, so it was quite easy for me to, I was physically, already in Basel, and then I was able to find a job in Basel. So I think it's a good point though, because I think that there are certain hubs, globally for pharma. So you either have to move or be willing to move, or have to be located, in those positions. So yeah.
Okay. Although I'm right on time, you started, and it's. I was going to make the point. You started on the medical writing side on the agents in the agencies, but you did start in the UK, didn't you? And then you moved agents. I
Exactly.
think you moved agencies. So
Yeah.
okay. So I'm not trying to, just a few hints here as to the background is quite useful. So you're a
Yeah,
medical
sure.
writer. You started in the UK. You moved within comms. You're over in Switzerland. You moved into pharma. And you've got quite a wide sort of variety of expertise and experience behind you. Okay, so
Exactly. Yeah.
so let's come back to that in a moment. I'd like to introduce the other members of the panel. Kate, we're going to go around in alphabetical order. So, Kate, give us a couple of minutes about yourself. Where are you? Who are you? What have you done?
Hi, everybody. I'm really delighted and honoured to be here in what is the evening for me in Sydney. So that's where I'm currently based, is Sydney. But for those of you who can track down accents easily, you'll hear that I'm originally from the UK, and my upbringing was there. And I would also say my career upbringing was there as well. So in London, I worked across a few different agencies, not too many, but enough to sort of get to, I suppose, around the account director, senior account director type level. And my experience across therapy area and across activity was really, really broad, kind of everything from PR and comms through to med ed, through to international symposia, brand planning. And I'd say that was a real advantage of often being contracted by the global headquarters of a company who in those days had bigger budgets as well. So you were able to benefit from things like understanding the brand planning process, which now I know is handled a lot more internally by pharma companies. So I think making the switch might be getting actually harder. But since moving to Sydney about 13 years ago, I first of all stayed in agency, and zeroed in on my kind of passion area, which is patient experience. And then my career kind of funneled in that direction. But first of all, agency side. And then I was actually really keen to get what in those days was client side, but pharma side. And I was very fortunate that I'd done some really exciting work with a client of mine, bumped into her at a medical conference, and the rest, as they say, is history. And that was kind of my golden leap. So now I work patient experience currently at J&J, having moved from another pharma company that I worked with until relatively recently. So that's me in a nutshell, Peter. And yet, thanks so
Excellent.
much for including me.
No. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to keep going in alphabetical order. So, Faiz, I guess you're next. So, tell us a bit about who you are, where you are, what you've done.
Yeah, so I'm Faiz Kermani. Peter, really good to be here. Known Peter for years, before my time even in MedComms, so yeah, it's good to see you. So I, like Sian, actually, I started in an agency. I started in the UK, then I went across to the US for a couple of years, and then I was looking for a change, and I found myself going to Basel, and as Sian said, it's a bit of a hub. So I'd worked as a medical writer mainly, but then I also worked for a while as an account director. So I got a bit of experience on that side. So I had a bit of experience on the medical writing side and also on the budget side of things. And I think both those proved to be transferable skills when I came into working for a pharma company. Like Sian says, I also found a lot of people didn't have that background, so you could kind of get on with things that other people maybe look to someone else to do. And so I think that's been a bit of an advantage, really.
Okay, great. That's fantastic. Okay, thanks. We'll explore some more of that in a moment. But Abigail, again, same question to you. Where are you? Who are you?
Hi, Ryan. It's Abby Stevenson. Abigail's kind of my Sunday name, but yeah, you can call me Abby. So really excited to be here. So Peter, you introduced me to MedComms 14 years ago. So I got my first MedComms job from one of your MedComms events in Oxford. So yeah, so thanks for that little introduction to MedComms, and I'm really happy to be able to come back 14 years later in one of your webinars. So I'm based in Manchester in the UK. I work for a mid-sized pharma company called Chiesi, working in the rare disease space, and I'm actually working in a health economics role. So I'm global health economics and outcomes research lead. But I did start off in MedComms. So I've kind of pivoted, not really pivoted, but more like zigzagged from MedComms into pharma. So I didn't go straight into pharma from MedComms. So I worked in MedComms for 4 years, and then I actually moved to the public sector. So I'd done some value communications work when I was working at my previous agency. And so I went to work for NICE as a technical analyst there. So working with the NICE committees, there's so one of the offices of NICE is in Manchester. So I worked there for 2 years. So I learned a lot about health economics and the NHS. Then I actually went back to consultancy, but more a specialist health economics consultancy. So I learned more about value communications, market access, doing health technology assessments for pharma clients. So worked there for 4 years, and then found the perfect role at Chiesi, which has its headquarters here in Manchester. So I worked as the UK market access manager there for 2 years, and I've just moved to a global role. So yeah, a bit of a convoluted route, but I think it's important to know it's not just medical communications and scientific communications roles you can go for with your experience. There's lots of other jobs in pharma. So Kate works in patient experience, regulatory, commercial. I think the skills that you get in MedComms are really transferable to lots of other roles in pharma.
Okay. So I think one of the dangers of this conversation is it can feel a bit like, well, you're either in MedComms agency or you're in pharma, and it's a sort of there or there, and it's not. I mean, in MedComms agencies, there's lots of different roles. In pharma, there's lots of different roles, and so on. So I just think we need to be a little bit careful of that, or mindful of that sort of thing as we're talking. The personal stories and your different personal stories are quite insightful there, and we'll see where we go with this. I was going to start with saying, admitting, I went from pharma to agencies many years ago, it has to be said. I've never understood why more people from pharma don't come into agencies, because when I went into the agency, I thought it was blindingly obvious that within an agency you needed to really fully understand how pharma works. And it's interesting what Sian's been saying about the other way around sort of thing. The biggest challenge I had, let's be honest about it, was I came in from pharma thinking I knew what was going on, and I walked into a completely different culture. And I was told off quite a lot for talking about us, as in the client. I went on the account management side, and I would talk. I was accused of talking about it as though I was on the pharma side, sort of thing. And I just think, you know, the skill sets we'll come back to, and you all talked about, are one thing, but there's there is a cultural thing here, and I just thought maybe we can start with that. You know, you've gone from an agency environment to the client side. Sian, just run with that a little bit and talk about what, if any, you see as being the challenges along that route from that point of view.
Yeah, it's a great question. And when I was interviewing people, lots of themes came up. And I think one of the things about agencies is there's like a shared camaraderie and teamwork, because you're kind of joining together to sort of serve the client. And that doesn't really exist as much in-house, because there's a different, it can do if you work on a project team, and you obviously your shared goal is to deliver this project, and normally you're closer to the sort of the final user of that, which might be a patient, it might be an HCP or something. But I do generally think that in-house in pharma there's just a completely different culture. You have to kind of strip back. If you're coming from MedComms agency into pharma, you've almost got to take away that kind of customer serving, people pleasing side from the agency, and remove that and realize that you're actually part of that team, and you can say no, you can challenge things, which maybe you don't feel so freely you're able to do as a sort of service provider. So I think one of the things that got me, and I think Faiz, you said it to me when we were kind of we had our discussion, and I think it's actually in the book, it can feel like you've got 10 bosses, because there's a structure where you have parallel functions. You have your functional lead, and then there'll be another functional lead, and you might have to consult with all of these different leaders, before you can push through your project. So it can feel like you've got multiple bosses at times, which can take a little bit of getting used to. So yeah, I don't know if Faiz, if you wanted to add something, you had some really nice points on that.
Yeah, actually, the one anecdote I should add is that when I was working on the agency side for a while, you were my client. So yeah, so I think it's true.
This is all starting to get a bit incestuous, this call, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I'm just looking at some of the names popping up here, and I'm like, wow, it's a long time since we were in contact. So yeah, I think that's one of the it's just so complex about who you're dealing with. It's not like you're dealing with like one person for something, and I think sometimes on the agency side, you might not see how many people we may need to consult or get buy-in from just to get something to move, something that seems really simple. We might have to deliver the message, but it's that internal wrangling that we have to do before we can get back to you. And that's something also I never appreciated from the agency side. It's like, oh, why isn't so-and-so not responding? Or you know, I've reminded them for the third time, there's this deadline, and they know it's a deadline. But you might be trying your best on this side, but you've got to deal, as Sian said, with these multiple people, and they may not all be aligned as well.
On that front, you're nodding away, Kate. Have you got some views on that?
Yeah, no, I'm nodding away because I completely agree. I think there is quite a marked change. I've noticed actually as I've gone, because I've been I was a product lead for a while, and then I've gone into patient experience. And Sian's comment about the camaraderie is really interesting, because I found being a product lead somehow was a lot more similar to agency side, because it was quite marketing focused. You're executing on tactics, you're bringing a team along with you. Patient experience sits a bit out to the side and then really picks up on Faiz's point around your so cross-functional and to move things forward, and there's an absolute compliance focus, which agency side I wouldn't really have understood that complexity. And you know, definitely I think now understanding the way the wheels turn in pharma, it's really interesting, and actually it makes, you know, I find it really inspiring, because actually everybody really is trying to do the right thing. But that's not to say every now and again I don't miss that a brief could land on Friday night, and by Tuesday morning you had something really good for your client because you just could pull together the teams you needed agency side. So yeah, no real additions, but just to say I've experienced exactly what's being called out, and I think it is worthwhile noticing that there's quite a big difference. I personally love, in a way, the autonomy that Sian spoke to, client side, that you can actually say no, you can challenge, and it is up to you to kind of be the master of your own destiny, as opposed to a complete sort of absolute team player who does need to do a lot of people pleasing. If you're employed by you know, a pharma client to deliver work, then as an agency you need to deliver that work. You can question, but at the end of the day, your delivery.
It's interesting what you're saying there. I don't know, Abby, have you got a view on that? Listening to you talking, it's like we've got more. You'd sort of think in the agency you've got more freedom and more opportunity to be individual and creative and question and all the rest of it. Whereas within a pharma, I know, again, we're oversimplifying things. Within the corporate pharma type environment, oh goodness, you can't do anything without having been signed off by 14 people and all the rest of it. I think that I just think that's a bit interesting. And I don't know, Abby, have you got any thoughts?
No, I think that's good, and it very much. I think both on the agency side and the pharma side, it depends on the kind of company you work for. So I've been very lucky when I worked in agency. I worked for some brilliant consultancies with great leadership. I had some great clients. I worked with great teams. You know, I remember, as Sian said, you know, that camaraderie when, you know, you're pulling an all-nighter or you've got a big deadline working together. So I've been very lucky in that side. But so I'm a mid-sized pharma, so we rely really heavily on the expertise of our agencies. And maybe it's because I've worked in agency, but I really use the people that I work with as they're my trusted partners, and I really need them to deliver as much as, you know, I'm the client, but I need to get the best out of them, and that, you know, I need them just as much as they need my business. So I think that is a little bit in other companies where you've got lots of, you know, you might have lots of agencies on your books, you might not have that reliance, whereas I always, you know, for some projects I almost use them as staff extenders, so I feel that like they are part of my team. But I know other people in pharma don't necessarily treat their agencies like that, but I think that's super important. And having come from agency, I think that gives you the unique perspective and being able to get the best out of your consultancies and get the best project, I think. I know Sian's nodding very heavily there.
No, I can
Yeah, go on, Sian.
agree. I mean, I do look at some colleagues and they don't necessarily share. There's this, I think there's a bit of a fear internally that you can't share everything with your agency, even though they're under CDA, so you can share everything, you know. I think because you know, I have that perspective of being on the other side of a client who hasn't shared all the information, and then you deliver something and it's, you know, not what they want, and you have these constant kind of review cycles and then arguing over budget. I really try and avoid that. So I personally will share absolutely everything that's possible to share with the agency, you know, have regular calls with them, almost like you say, Abby, having them like an internal person, because it can only be a good thing. You know, it makes me look good, because then the projects that, you know, that I deliver are then seen by the leadership team, you know, and they're more likely to be the first to go, like the thing that we need, you know. So I don't really fully kind of understand the logic necessarily of some of my colleagues in kind of not bringing them on board, but I think that's because they haven't been from the agency side. It's one of those benefits, I think, of being, you know, from an agency. You know what the agency people need in order to deliver the best work.
Do you find yourself, can I ask this, you know, helping educate your colleagues?
Yes, yeah, for sure. I do, yeah. I mean, I think just bringing them on board of this is how we're going to work with our agencies. You know, the other thing that I try to do as well is kind of connect the agencies together, you know, so that there's not this competition between agencies or like fighting over. It's very transparent. This is what you're going to be doing. This is what you're going to be doing. You know, if you have any questions, work with each other, you know. So that's generally how I work, because I just like everything to be really transparent so that everyone knows what their role is. So I try and kind of demonstrate that way of working to the team and the colleagues. Whether or not it's always successful, it remains to be seen, but yeah.
And just switching it around, do you find the agency folk are nervous or suspicious of you if they find out that you've been on their side of the fence, as it were?
It's a good question. Yeah. I haven't experienced it, but I'm intrigued to see if the others have.
Okay, right. Let's have a quick run around everybody else. Abby, have you got any stories on that front?
Yeah, I think that's been the hardest thing, moving from agency to pharma, thinking, well, I can just write that abstract myself. And then with all the other, with pharma, there's a lot more meetings. So if for doing actual project work, if you burden yourself with that, which when I first started, I wanted to seem really keen, like, oh, I can do that. And in the end up, you're just working too many long hours. So yeah, learning to delegate and working with your trusted partner and trusting them to do it rather than just going, oh, I can just do that myself. So I think I have frustrated my agencies in the past by, yeah, changing final deliverables, just tweaking here and there, or just doing something. So it's learning to how to work best. And, you know, it's again, having, Sian mentioned at the beginning of a project, talking about your way of working, you know, all about transparency, giving them the brief that they need. There's nothing worse. I remember like having a client where you don't know what you're doing, you're not given the information. So having that at the beginning. But yeah, I think I probably have frustrated people by, but then again, I things like you've got that unique insight into the process and the agency side when it comes to proposals. So if a proposal isn't quite right, you can go back and say, can you explain, you know, why we need these extra drafts, or do we need this bit here? I think it just helps with the working together. But yeah, you just need to rein yourself in from doing work.
But it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, my early career at Bayer was, you know, clinical research, sales, marketing, then out onto the agency side, and you know that, you know, you think you're all one big happy family, but you sort of move from one to the other area, and it's amazing how the attitudes change. You know, someone you were working with alongside of last week is suddenly viewing you as being, you know, on the other side. And I just think as you go through a career, these things happen. But I just, you know, particularly early on in the career, it's probably worth at least being aware of that and understanding it, or trying to understand it, and sort of, as you say, work with it a little bit. Faiz, have you got any thoughts on that one?
In what sense?
Whether you know you are viewed by your agencies as a bit of a troublemaker because you know a bit too much.
I think one of the things, going back to I think what Abby said, is about wanting to do stuff yourself. I know sometimes I could write stuff myself, and so when it comes back and it's not what you want, it's really frustrating. Or when somebody tries to, I would say, take you for a ride, that's particularly frustrating when you think, well, I know that wasn't that much. I don't think that was that much work. I would have definitely done it quicker. That gets a bit frustrating. I'd hope, given the difficulties you've got to do with pleasing various people internally, I think, you know, you hope you can work well with your agencies on and balance it out. But I think what Abby was saying is particularly the problem I had. You're just stuck in so many things that if you start trying to do everything yourself, and then you also have to let go and just realize that sometimes as well with your agency, maybe at the beginning they just have to work to get to the level where you'll work really well together. It may not be the first pass. It depends on deadlines and things. But I'd hope I've started to be a bit more understanding on that front.
Before we, I mean, let's pull back to the basics of what we're trying to talk about today in terms of, you know, moving careers or moving the job, as it were. Kate, just come back to this a little bit. Or someone's asked about the politics. Let's actually cover that side off just a little bit. You know, going from agency politics to corporate politics, how big a shock was that? And yeah, just have a couple of minutes on that, Kate, just to sort of talk about what you found there. And you know, I suppose the bottom line is, what would you say to someone thinking of making the move? You know, how would you prepare them for that, if indeed they need to be prepared at all? Or did you not see a problem there?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. I think one of the biggest differences that I noticed, and it's kind of politics, but it talks more to maybe overall structures, that when I moved from agency to in pharma, I think in agency it's often all hands on deck, although of course you've got account managers, medical writers, designers, etc. Sometimes an account manager might find themselves proofing, which could potentially be, you know, a medical writer's job or whatever, but it's all hands on deck to get the right product out at the right time. Pharma side, what I find is the lanes are pretty defined, and and the way that I suppose the companies are set up is to come to a deliverable through everybody swimming in their own lane really well and in synchrony to get to that deliverable. But the lanes aren't really crossed in the same way, is my experience. And there can be really good reasons for that, which I failed to understand when I first moved. You know, it would be really frustrating for me because I knew I could proof something and I was thinking, well, you know, this department's dragging their heels, was my perception as a product lead, you know, seeing all of the different functions. Why don't I just quickly do it, sort of thing. And then I had a really good boss at the time who kind of took me to the side, knew my background, and she said, the thing is, if you stray into their lane, you haven't been formally trained in the skills that you require. So you're exposing yourself to risk, but ultimately you're exposing the company at the end to risk. And it's kind of just not the way that things are done. So I don't know how you know, everybody else on the call has found things, but that was a surprise to me. And sort of similar to the point that Abby was making, particularly in the beginning, I really wanted to prove I was keen. I felt I had this kind of golden opportunity, still very much had that customer pleasing customer service mindset. So I found myself really working hard, but sometimes not quite understanding how to work to get the recognition, because people who knew me well and took the trouble could see what was happening, that I was actually working really hard, and anything that I touched did move forward. But sometimes I just needed to I suppose the biggest thing maybe is that I find in pharma super processed, which actually I've discovered goes really well with my personality. I actually really like following a recipe. But if you're the kind who's a bit more of an experimental chef, perhaps perhaps something where everybody can jump in as and when they need to is worth sort of paying attention to as well. So yeah, I turn it over to everybody else what you guys think, or that could just be an isolated experience.
Go on, Sian, from your experience.
Yeah, I think it largely depends on the company, because I found, so for example, I found Roche quite entrepreneurial, which can, have pros and cons, because you almost had to create your own process for things, and create your own review team. And, obviously you knew which people you needed to involve, like medical review would be as medical and things like that, but it was much more entrepreneurial. And now it's very structured where I work. So I think there are pros and cons, because it does mean that if you have a very innovative idea, you almost have to create the process to get that through. And if that process isn't there, then it might be almost impossible. So I think it really depends on the company, but I really like the perspective of the swim lanes. I hadn't really thought of it like that, but I think it's a nice analogy, because it's exactly like that. And you can kind of tread on people's toes if you try and take things, and I have some examples of working with a patient experience team, because I think medical and patient there's quite a lot of crossover, and really having to bring those colleagues in on projects was very important, rather than kind of trying to do things without bringing them on board.
100%.
I guess the truth is that different companies, different pharma companies are different, agencies are different, and so on and so forth. So again, we're in danger of trying to oversimplify this. Everyone's in a different position. Just out of interest, as you were talking, I was just trying to think, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but did any of you go through what's the right word? I think you've all maybe implied that you knew someone in the client company, and that was your connection into the client company, rather than sitting in an agency going, I feel like making a move, I will go and look after that ad. Abby, you look like you just disagreed with me. So I'm just interested in the process side of it, as it were. If someone wants to go and join a pharma company, do they need to know somebody there, or just talk around that? Abby, it looks like you're going to disagree with me, so I think you must have gone through a process there.
Yeah, so I always knew that I was going to move to pharma, but I wasn't sure whether it was the right time. But I was approached by a recruitment consultant, and usually I wouldn't have been interested, but because everything came together, it was the right location. It was the Chiesi had worked in similar therapy areas. It was a lot of variety. Everything seemed to fit. So it was a recruitment agent, but I did actually know somebody who'd gone to Chiesi from one of my agencies. So I spoke to her, but she didn't approach me for the role. But I don't think it's just things like recruitment agencies. It's things like sometimes there's like short-term contracts. I know some people have done that, and that's often, even though you think, oh, that's a bit of a risk, it's a short-term contract, it'll get you that experience. So like maternity cover or a 12-month contract. So it does help if you know something. So I know some people have had a client and they've been brought in. That's a very easy way, but there are lots of other routes as well.
Any reflections on how the process might be different, I suppose? Again, I can feel myself asking this question and wondering what the hell you're going to say. But is there? I mean, someone sitting in an agency might be sitting there going, "Well, what's the difference in terms of the process of being interviewed and taken on by a pharma company, if it can be summed up in some sort of a simplified way?" Have you got any views on that? Sean,
I
have
think
you
it
got the experience there?
depends on the
Yeah.
company.
I was just going to say it depends. I could hear myself burying myself in that rabbit hole.
I
Okay,
think it
maybe I
depends on the
should.
company, and it depends on the size of the company as well. So I think the really big pharma, I mean, you could be looking 3 to 6 months, the whole process, and that's just because of the size of the organization. There might be a hiring manager, but the hiring manager needs to speak to their boss, who then needs to speak to the big boss, and it, you know, and that's not including the steps involved, like your interview with the HR manager, your interview with the hiring manager, your interview with multiple other stakeholders. So I always say to people, you've got to have a lot of patience, because this process can take quite a long time. Having said that, I think it, even with the size of the company, sometimes it really depends on the urgency, you know, and the need, because I have had situations where the whole process has really been driven by my notice period more than it has been, you know, the kind of process of the interviews. So I think it largely depends on the size of the company and the urgency, I think.
Okay, just again, a blunt question, but you know, we're in what are we in June 2024, and you know, it has been quite a disrupted time in and around MedComms. There is a lot of change. There are people moving and so on, which is one of the reasons why I'm thinking this sort of a discussion is quite useful. Just give us a sense of what's happening at your end, as it were. I mean, pharma's also going through quite a lot of change at the moment, isn't it? I mean, is there lots of opportunity for people to move into pharma, or is that as you know, not quite as simple as that at the moment?
I think it depends on
Anybody want to say anything to that, Faiz? Yeah.
Yeah, I said I think it
You
depends.
can't just keep saying it depends. You can't.
Well, it does depend on the company. Pharma is going through changes, but there's always opportunities in some places versus others. I see somebody's already asking what jobs you can go for in pharma, and you know, we already said that there may be different fits for you as you go into the industry. I mean, going back to what you asked originally, I applied for a job without knowing somebody in pharma, and then when I had the interview, it was somebody I did know, and then actually three of the interviewers were people I'd known from my past in various things as clients. So I kind of found my way in. So I would say people not to. It's always good if you know someone, but it doesn't mean you can't get in. You'll probably find if you've worked long enough in this industry, you'll know someone or be one step away from knowing them anyway. So yeah.
So networking and LinkedIn and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, networking, but not fake networking. I mean, I sometimes get people trying to ping me, and you think, come on, there's no real reason why you're trying to. You just look, you're fishing. Those kind of people, it's so obvious. It's got to be like genuine.
Blunt question. Okay, it's a blunt question. Are you paid more in pharma than they are in agency land? Do you see that as an upside or not? Anybody got a view on that? Do you know enough to know whether there's I don't know, a lot of this stuff is, you know, what are the benchmarks, Peter? But, you know, there are various comments thrown around. I've seen them in discussions about how, you know, you're paid a lot more in pharma. You know, I can't afford to leave pharma and join an agency because they don't pay as much, that sort of thing. I just wondered what your sense of that was. I'm not asking specifically you, just as a generalization. You got a view on that? Anybody?
I think pharma, the salary is better, but one observation that I have is I think you can move up quicker through the ranks in agency. So you could go quite quickly, I think, from a medical writer, say, through to a kind of senior account director or something like that, and then you can kind of build your salary up quicker. You might in pharma find yourself sort of stuck for 2 or 3 years in the same role on the same salary. So I think it's just a different experience. It's not quite as agile, I think, you know, for your career, I guess. And there are.
And what about the sort of the perks and the benefits and the, you know, does the pharma company?
I think it depends. Like some of them do like share. I mean, it like Faiz says, it depends on the company, but some of them do shares. You know, I think there's benefits like really good pension scheme and things like that. So I think for the benefit side, it might be slightly better than agency as well. But yeah, I'm interested to hear what the others think.
Yeah, so I think we are paid more, but then some pharma companies, there is a risk of redundancy as well. The reorgs. I haven't had to go through reorg, but I know a lot of people who work for different companies had to reapply for the right, you know, jobs. And that I know in the States at the moment, there's a lot of redundancies going on and people having to move jobs. So Bizarrely, I think maybe agency, yes, you can rise, there's always the chance of promotion, and yeah, the risk of redundancy is probably a bit low. But interested to hear.
I mean, that's an interesting comment at the moment. In MedComms, there's quite a lot of restructuring and reorganisation going on. So I think it probably depends a little bit on where you're sitting at the moment as to how you view that. Who else? It looks like, sorry, Kate, you're going to say something there. Did I cut across you?
I was agreeing. I think that, at the risk of using the phrase of it depends, I think it really does depend, actually. And I think it's quite perfectly reasonable that finance is a motivator, right? Like, we all have to pay our bills. And so it's quite reasonable to think of that. And I think it's such a shame in a way that we don't have more open conversations. So I really welcome this one. I guess what I've noticed is even within pharma, there is actually a huge range anyway over in Australia. I think there is quite a big difference in how the same role may be remunerated company to company. You've kind of got you could take a little bit of a risk and go to a company that maybe is emerging with one or two hero products, or you go to the kind of big pharma who perhaps are a bit more established, you know what you're going to get. And to Sian's point, they maybe have the wraparound benefits kind of thing. Like, it's now been quite a while since I have been agency side. But I think if I was going to answer bluntly, I think, yes, you get paid more pharma side. And actually, one of the things I personally have quite liked about it that I think was lacking for me on the agency side, but it could have just been kind of the route that I chose, was initially the career progression agency side seemed really natural and obvious, and if, bluntly, was relatively easily won. But then it seemed to plateau, and it was quite political. My experience was it was quite political as to who was moving up. And so for me, actually, when I did transition, that was a really great point to transition. But I think there can be really good structures, because pharma companies tend to be weighty, or the mainstream ones. There's a lot of resource around, future proofing and succession planning and that kind of thing. So definitely that's been an area of learning for me, actually, that I never really had at agency. Succession planning that I was exposed to at agency was probably done over a drink on a Friday evening, which was a nice way to approach it, but it's a lot more formalized, has been my experience. So just a few points of consideration in there, and really boiling down as well. I think Sian's point around the camaraderie at the very beginning, that's actually money talks, but things like that can be very, very valuable as well, and really heartening. And it's, I guess, at different stages of my life, I've welcomed different elements of jobs. So maybe just money's really important. I think we should have more open conversations about it, but equally it's the entire package, I think, that is important to consider.
And I'm just going to jump in because I think it's a really important point. So, and I'd be interested to hear other people's thought. But when I worked in agency, I think it was a bit easier to work flexibly and part-time. So I had quite young children. I worked part-time. Yes, I often ended up working over my hours, but I did work part-time, and the location, it didn't matter where I worked. Whereas the role that I'm in now, I don't know about other people's roles, but I don't think I could get that part-time. That wouldn't, I know I think GSK, they're really open to this kind of bigger company, their job shares and stuff, but the company that I'm in, it would definitely not be a part-time role, which, that wouldn't have worked for me earlier on in my career.
I just wanted to add something about the benefits and salary thing. It's definitely true, I think, that you get more on this side, but you've got to remember that like I work at Roche, I walk past the stock price every morning. If that drops, I know that's going to change. You might not be walking in there the next week. So you have to bear that in mind as well, what you're going with. It's not forever, if you think you're going to get a better package.
Okay. Again, I guess wherever you are in the world, there are going to, or in whatever position, whatever company you're in, there's days like that, isn't there? We're probably slightly over time. Sian, do you want to just have you got a few, I don't know, just let's finish with Sian, sorry, because I'm going to have to finish the recording. So Sian, you're used to talking, you've talked to a lot of people, you're used to talking to people about this sort of thing. Have you got any sort of tips or just quick obvious tips that you can share for people who are thinking about going in this direction from agency side to pharma?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the obvious one is kind of leveraging your network. So it's kind of speaking with your existing clients, you know, people that you used to work with, or and for some people in agency, like medical writers, it's even just getting in front of the client more often so that they can see you, you know, and then you can you know, assess how approachable the client is, and then, you know, have a discussion like openly with them about, you know, are there any vacancies, or I saw this vacancy, would you mind putting in a word in? Because I think one of the common denominators is that there almost needs to be, you need to be in the right place at the right time. You need to have some kind of connection, whether that's either somebody that you know in the company, or, you know, somebody that actually kind of puts you forward for something. I think having somebody kind of you know, vouching for you is absolutely critical. It's really, really, really important. That's what that was my experience. I had somebody kind of, you know, vouching for me, and in both of the instances where I found a job. So that's the first thing, like make sure that you kind of leverage your network as much as possible. And there are a few things in agency that I think you might want to consider if you are thinking about moving across, and there are secondment opportunities. You know, I myself, when I kind of reflect, I actually had a couple of opportunities where I could have done a secondment, and I've seen people kind of move from a secondment, say doing a pubs manager, over into the client themselves. And the other way, just from the interviewing of that I did, that I was really interesting, and it's not necessarily accessible for everyone, but you might want to consider doing a master's. So there are masters that really lend themselves well for certain roles within pharma. So Abby, you know, what you're doing is a classic one where you can do a pharmacoeconomics master's, which is what I'm doing now actually myself. Some pharma companies actually will recruit directly from the universities. I know that GSK does that as well. And there are other masters, like pharmacology is another one, and infectious diseases. So I think those are the three main routes. But yeah, just mostly it's just kind of really networking as much as possible. And another good example was Kate's example. You know, a lot of the time there are HR managers on the booth for, you know, conferences. Like speak to the people on the booth. You know, that's a good way as well. So
Okay, look, I'm going to draw the line there because we are slightly over time, but I think it's fascinating. We've covered a lot of ground there, and I think I think we've probably made people think a little bit. And I know I can talk for you. You're all very happy to hear from people if they want to reach out to you. LinkedIn is an easy way of doing it. But hopefully we've raised some thoughts in people's minds out there. I mean, the bottom line is MedComms is a huge world, really. I mean, you know, I don't know where it stops and starts and all the rest of it. There's lots of people on the agency side that are intrigued by the pharma side, and vice versa. But there's just lots and lots of different sorts of roles in MedComms these days, in and around MedComms these days. So the more people think about it and talk about it and network with each other, hopefully the more they find their own avenues, sort of thing. So I'm absolutely fantastic to have you on. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to ask you anybody wants to know what I'm doing, medcommsnetworking.com, but otherwise encourage you to talk to each other. Please follow up via LinkedIn. Panelists, give us a little wave. We'll say goodbye and tell everyone to have a safe day. Cheers. Bye.